Founding of the VOC, 1602. The formation of the VOC was a revolutionary step in the history of global trade and finance. Before its establishment, individual Dutch merchants and companies operated independently, often competing against each other. The creation of the VOC brought these disparate entities under a single corporate umbrella, enabling more coordinated and effective competition against the Portuguese and Spanish, who dominated the spice trade at the time. The VOC was granted a 21-year monopoly on Dutch trade in Asia by the States General of the Netherlands. This monopoly was not just commercial, it included quasi-governmental powers such as the authority to wage war, negotiate treaties, mint coins, and establish colonies. This unprecedented level of power for a private company allowed the VOC to operate almost as a sovereign state in its areas of influence. The Amboyna massacre, 1623. The Amboyna massacre remains one of the most infamous incidents in the VOC's history. The execution of English traders and their associates in Amboyna, modern-day Ambourne, was justified by the Dutch on the grounds of a supposed conspiracy against the VOC. This event intensified the already fierce rivalry between the English and Dutch trading companies. The massacre had long-lasting repercussions, leading to the end of cooperation between the English East India Company and the VOC. It also fueled anti-Dutch sentiment in England, contributing to the outbreak of the Anglo-Dutch Wars later in the century. The VOC's actions in Amboyna demonstrated its willingness to use extreme measures to maintain its commercial dominance. Establishment of Batavia, 1619. Batavia became the linchpin of the VOC's Asian operations. Located on the north coast of Java, the city was ideally situated to control the shipping lanes and spice-producing regions of Southeast Asia. The establishment of Batavia marked a shift from purely commercial operations to territorial control, as the VOC began to exert political and military influence over the surrounding areas. Under Jan Pietersoen Cohen, Batavia was developed into a well-fortified city with a thriving port. It served as the central hub for the VOC's trade network, linking the Spice Islands of Indonesia with markets in India, China, Japan, and beyond. The city's establishment also reflected the VOC's strategic vision of creating a sustainable base of operations in Asia, rather than relying solely on transient trading posts. Control of the spice trade. The VOC's monopoly on the spice trade was achieved through a combination of military force, strategic alliances, and innovative trade practices. By the mid-17th century, the company had secured control over the major spice-producing regions, including the Moluccas, Maluku Islands, Banda Islands, and parts of Java and Sumatra. The VOC imposed strict control over spice production and distribution, regulating prices and supply to maximize profits. This monopoly allowed the company to dictate terms to European buyers and accumulate vast wealth. However, it also led to significant hardship for local populations, who were often coerced into producing spices under harsh conditions. Conquest of Malacca, 1641. The capture of Malacca was a strategic coup for the VOC. This historic city had been a major trading center under Portuguese control since 1511. By seizing Malacca, the VOC gained control over the vital Strait of Malacca, one of the busiest maritime routes in the world. This conquest allowed the VOC to dominate the flow of goods between the Indian Ocean and the South China Sea. It also undermined Portuguese influence in the region and facilitated the expansion of Dutch trade with China, India, and other parts of Southeast Asia. The VOC's control of Malacca remained a cornerstone of its commercial strategy for over a century. The Treaty of Westphalia, 1648. The Treaty of Westphalia was a turning point for the Dutch Republic and the VOC. The treaty ended the 80 Years' War with Spain, leading to the recognition of Dutch independence. This political stability was crucial for the VOC, as it removed a major military threat and allowed the company to focus on expanding its trade empire. The end of the war also opened new opportunities for the VOC to consolidate its position in Asia. With Spanish and Portuguese competitors weakened, the Dutch could exploit new markets and strengthen their existing holdings. The treaty's significance extended beyond the immediate cessation of hostilities, as it marked the rise of the Dutch Republic as a major European power with a global reach. Expansion into Japan, 1609. The VOC's entry into Japan was a landmark achievement. The company established a trading post on the island of Hirado in 1609, gaining access to Japanese silver and other valuable commodities. This relationship was further solidified in 1641 when the VOC moved to Dejima, an artificial island in Nagasaki. Unlike other European traders, the Dutch were willing to comply with Japanese restrictions on foreign contact and cultural influence. This pragmatic approach allowed the VOC to maintain a unique trading position in Japan, even during the Sakoku period when Japan largely isolated itself from the rest of the world. The Dutch-Japanese trade was highly profitable, providing the VOC with valuable goods such as silver, copper, and ceramics. The Dutch in Taiwan, 1624 to 1662. The VOC's occupation of Taiwan, Formosa, was part of its broader strategy to control regional trade networks. The Dutch established Fort Zeelandia on the southwest coast of the island, using it as a base for trade with China and Japan. Taiwan's fertile land also provided agricultural products that supplemented the VOC's trade commodities. However, the Dutch presence on Taiwan was contested by local indigenous groups and the Ming loyalist Koxinga, who sought to expel the foreign occupiers. In 1662, Koxinga successfully besieged Fort Zeelandia, forcing the Dutch to surrender and withdraw from the island. This defeat marked the end of the VOC's ambitions in Taiwan and highlighted the limits of Dutch colonial power in the face of determined local resistance. Exploration of Australia, 1606 to 1644. The VOC played a pioneering role in the European exploration of Australia, known as New Holland at the time. Willem Janszoon's expedition in 1606 was the first recorded European landing on the Australian mainland, mapping parts of the western coast of Cape York Peninsula. Subsequent expeditions, including those led by Dirk Hartog, Jan Carstenszoon, and Abel Tasman, expanded European knowledge of the continent. Abel Tasman's voyages in 1642 and 1644 were particularly significant. He discovered Tasmania, which he named Van Diemen's Land, and mapped parts of New Zealand and the Australian coast. These explorations laid the groundwork for later European colonization and significantly contributed to the global geographical understanding of the time. Establishment of the Cape Colony, 1652. The establishment of the Cape Colony at the southern tip of Africa was a strategic move to support the VOC's long-distance trade routes. The Cape of Good Hope was an essential stopover point for ships traveling between Europe and Asia, providing fresh supplies and a place for crew members to recuperate. Under Jan van Riebeek's leadership, the settlement grew into a thriving colony, with agriculture and livestock farming supporting the needs of passing ships. The Cape Colony also became a multicultural society, with Dutch settlers, indigenous Khoikhoi people, and slaves from various parts of Africa and Asia contributing to its development. The colony's success reinforced the VOC's dominance in the Indian Ocean trade network. The Battle of Colachel, 1741. The Battle of Colachel was a rare but notable defeat for the VOC. The battle took place on the southwestern coast of India, where the Dutch sought to expand their influence by supporting local rulers against the Kingdom of Travancore. However, the forces of Maharaja Marthandavarma decisively defeated the Dutch, capturing several of their officers and soldiers. This defeat marked the decline of Dutch power in India and demonstrated the limits of European colonial ambitions in the face of resilient local resistance. The VOC's failure at Colachel underscored the growing challenges the company faced in maintaining its dominance amidst rising regional powers. The Anglo-Dutch Wars, 1652 to 1674. The three Anglo-Dutch Wars were a series of naval conflicts that significantly impacted the VOC's operations. These wars were driven by commercial rivalry and competition for control over trade routes and colonies. The First Anglo-Dutch War, 1652–1654, ended with the Treaty of Westminster, which favoured the English but allowed the Dutch to retain their trading privileges. The Second Anglo-Dutch War, 1665–1667, was more destructive, with significant losses on both sides. The Treaty of Breda ended the conflict, with the Dutch ceding New Netherland, modern-day New York, to the English in exchange for Suriname. The Third Anglo-Dutch War, 1672–1674, saw the Dutch, led by Admiral Michiel de Ruyter, successfully defend their maritime interests. Despite these conflicts, the VOC managed to maintain its trading network, though the wars highlighted the vulnerability of Dutch maritime dominance and foreshadowed the rising power of England. The Glorious Revolution, 1688. The Glorious Revolution of 1688, which saw William of Orange ascend to the English throne as William III, had significant implications for the VOC. The revolution strengthened the ties between the Dutch Republic and England, leading to an era of increased cooperation and reduced military conflict. For the VOC, this political shift meant fewer threats to its trade routes and colonies from English competition. The improved relations facilitated a more stable environment for the company's operations, allowing it to focus on consolidating its trade networks rather than defending them against constant threats. The Fall of Bantam, 1682. The capture of Bantam in 1682 was another significant milestone in the VOC's expansion. Bantam was a major trading centre on the island of Java, controlled by the Sultanate of Banten. The VOC's victory over Banten allowed it to dominate the pepper trade and secure its position as the leading European power in Indonesia. The fall of Bantam also marked the decline of local resistance to Dutch colonial rule in Java. The VOC established tighter control over the island's trade and production, further entrenching its monopoly on spices and other valuable commodities. Monopoly on the coffee trade. The VOC's venture into the coffee trade in the late 17th and early 18th centuries added another lucrative commodity to its portfolio. The company established coffee plantations in Java and later in Sri Lanka, utilizing local labor and innovative agricultural techniques to produce high-quality coffee. The VOC's control over the coffee trade allowed it to dictate prices and supply, much like it had done with spices. This monopoly contributed to the global spread of coffee consumption and provided the company with substantial profits. The success of the coffee trade exemplified the VOC's ability to diversify its commercial interests and adapt to changing market demands. The decline in the 18th century. The 18th century marked a period of gradual decline for the VOC. Several factors contributed to this downturn, including increased competition from the English and French East India Companies, internal corruption, and operational inefficiencies. The company struggled to maintain its monopolies and faced rising costs associated with defending its far-flung trading posts and colonies. The VOC's financial difficulties were compounded by a series of military conflicts, such as the Fourth Anglo-Dutch War, which drained its resources and further weakened its position. By the late 18th century, the once dominant trading company was a shadow of its former self, struggling to adapt to a rapidly changing global economy. The Fourth Anglo-Dutch War, 1780–1784. The Fourth Anglo-Dutch War was a critical blow to the VOC. The war was driven by British attempts to curtail Dutch trade with the American colonies during the American War of Independence. The conflict disrupted the VOC's trade routes and resulted in significant financial losses. The war exposed the VOC's vulnerabilities and highlighted its declining military and commercial capabilities. The company's inability to effectively defend its interests against the British underscored the need for substantial reform and support from the Dutch government. Bankruptcy and nationalization, 1796. By 1796, the VOC was facing insurmountable debt and operational inefficiencies. The Dutch government intervened, nationalizing the company and assuming control of its assets and liabilities. This move was an attempt to stabilize the VOC's operations and mitigate the financial crisis that threatened the Dutch economy. Nationalization marked the beginning of the end for the VOC as a private entity. The government's involvement signaled a shift towards state-controlled colonialism, reflecting the broader changes in the nature of European overseas empires during this period. Formal dissolution, 1799. The formal dissolution of the VOC on December 31, 1799, marked the end of an era. After nearly 2 centuries of dominance in global trade and colonial expansion, the company was disbanded, and its remaining assets were transferred to the Dutch government. The dissolution of the VOC reflected the broader economic and political transformations of the late 18th century. The rise of competing colonial powers, coupled with internal mismanagement, had rendered the company obsolete. The Dutch government's takeover of VOC territories paved the way for a new phase of colonial administration and exploitation. Legacy of the VOC. The legacy of the VOC is multifaceted and complex. On one hand, the company played a crucial role in the development of global trade networks, the spread of capitalism, and the establishment of Dutch colonial empires. The VOC's innovations in corporate governance, finance, and maritime technology had a lasting impact on the world economy. However, the VOC's history is also marked by significant ethical controversies. The company's aggressive pursuit of profit often involved exploitation, violence, and the displacement of indigenous populations. The VOC's monopoly practices and colonial policies contributed to economic disparities and social injustices that resonate to this day. The dissolution of the VOC marked the end of one of the most powerful and influential trading companies in history. Its rise and fall offer valuable lessons about the interplay between commerce, politics, and ethics in the shaping of the modern world.